years. I've been president of the University Lakes Improvement Preservation Association and formed the group a number of years ago, and been doing that for 15 years, trying to clean up that area of town. So my perspective is that to be able to have good, healthy families, we need to have blight-free situations. I especially hate waste tires, and then 4 years ago I proposed the waste tire bill, which was not, it received no traction, if you can excuse the pun.
Thank you both so much. Appreciate your introductions and telling us a little bit about yourselves. Okay, so our first question is basically about what you think of this job and what you're signing up for here. So it's a two-part question. What is the role of district representative, and how will you ensure that the voice of your constituents remains relevant if you're elected? So since you went first before, Belinda, we'll go ahead and go with you.
Well, first of all, it's to make the laws for the state, and my perspective is we need to do more than look at our particular district. I look to improve the quality of the state and the greater Baton Rouge area and other greater municipal areas where we desperately need to improve the lives of our residents in the lesser developed areas. Belinda's comments about education, I think, were excellent. I agree that child care, early education, and the K through 12 school system have to be improved. Without the education, kids can never grow to the level they need to grow to be excellent citizens. And I think that's one of the problems, one of the things that feeds crime on a regular basis. But for me, my perspective is statewide, not just my district.
So I would agree with the idea that District 68 does not exist in a vacuum. When our state prospers, right, we can think about all of our citizens prospering. But I do think you have to hone in as a representative on the district that you're serving. I think it's really important to be out there listening to constituent voices around what they see the needs are in their district, right? The needs in District 68 might look really different than the needs in Monroe. And so one of your jobs as a legislator is to, when you get in there, is to convince the legislators from Monroe why they ought to care about what's going on in Baton Rouge. And so it's part of kind of thinking about Louisiana as a whole, but then also thinking about where are the commonalities among the districts, District 68, and how you can think about convincing other legislators to prioritize the needs that are facing your district as well.
Wonderful, thank you both. So we've already touched on education a little bit, but we're going to dive a little deeper into that with this other question. So the context for this question is there's a growing number of states and advocates for state-funded education savings accounts. These accounts would give students education opportunities outside of the public school system. Governor Edwards has vetoed these bills in the past, citing that it would cripple our already underfunded public school systems even further. Would you support a bill for this, quote, school choice? Why and why not? That's part one. I think we should go ahead and start with part one, and then we'll get to part two.
So I would not be inclined to support a legislation like that, in part because I think in many respects this is the new fad in education. There is absolutely no empirical evidence out there that I've been able to find that shows that programs like this are producing the results that we are expecting them to. And so I would hate to experiment with our state's school children with something that we really don't have evidence to show that it's going to work. So to me, I would rather be cautious as we look at this, let some other states who are investing in these kinds of programs look at and see, right, does it work there before we decide to put our toe in this water in Louisiana. I just think that, that it's not wise to do that. And I do think that we also have to be conscious of the fact that this is going to have enormous financial consequences for our existing schools.
I would tend to agree with using that program because I think that parental choice is key to supporting children in their education endeavor. I understand the risk of pulling money out of the public school system, but I would fully support the public school system as much as possible. And I'm very interested in early child care. I think it's after 6 weeks they can go into daycare, and I think during the time of the first 3 or 4 years of a child's life, it's most important that he find socialization, stable situation, good food, and I think those are necessary to get him prepared for kindergarten and on through his education system.
Thank you both so much. So there is the second part of this question, what you both talked about briefly, but so then how do you suggest that we manage or mitigate the potential impact of the loss of funding and resources in the public school system if this choice program were to be implemented?
I think it's going to be very difficult to mitigate the financial consequences of this on our traditional public school districts as well as our charter schools, right? So there are transactional costs that come with students leaving classrooms. So if you have a student that leaves for the scholarship program and you have 5 students in a grade across a school, that doesn't allow you to shut down a classroom, right? Losing 5 students, you still have to have the appropriate pupil to teacher ratios, and so you end up with catastrophic consequences when it comes to being able to provide for the students that are going to be left in those traditional public schools. And so it is going to be traditional districts have struggled with the advent of charter schools, and so I think that you would see this even just more manifold if we ended up with a scholarship program like that. I think it would lead to devastating financial consequences.
I would think that the state legislature is going to have to approve additional funds for public schools to be able to support that type of program, and I would hope that they would. The public school system is something I've always supported. I went to public school my entire life, all the way through college and grad school. My daughter went through public schools most of her life until high school. My adopted daughter went to public high school. So I want to see public high schools and public schools all the way along the K through 12 system thrive, but I think that we can find ways to do that with financing through the legislature.
Thank you both so much. We're going to move on, still talking about the children of our state and your district. In Louisiana, 1 in 5 children faces hunger. When children are hungry, they cannot focus in school, they experience greater health issues, and they have a greater likelihood of behavioral and social issues. Research shows that food assistance programs like Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and the Women's Infants Children Program, WIC, reduce poverty and food insecurity and lead to improved health and economic outcomes, particularly for our children. What meaningful policy solutions will you propose to make it easier for families to access nutritious foods? And we'll start with you first this time.
Well, first of all, I'm a Greater Baton Rouge Food Bank volunteer. I have over almost 900 hours since Ida working with the food bank, preparing meals for kids to take home over the weekend, and trying to support families because we know that hunger is an issue. I think the only way we can do it is to supply the money through the legislature to replace the money we're losing from the federal government. Thank you.
Okay. I would argue that we need to be providing free breakfast and lunch to all students in the state of Louisiana. So that would be my first policy initiative. My second policy initiative would be to change the way we allow people to register for SNAP and to recertify their eligibility. Right now, all of those things are online. People without access to high-speed broadband or with a computer in their home are having to fill out really complicated re-enrollment forms and applications on their phones. So I would address those things through bureaucratic changes to the applications. The third thing that I would do would be argue that we need to increase the state's earned income tax credit, which would allow more low-income families to keep their income to allow them to provide for their families in terms of nutritional food.
Thank you both so much for your thoughts there. We're going to shift gears here to law enforcement. So a growing number of people have called for financial resources to shift from law enforcement and be reallocated to education and healthcare. Would you support a bill reallocating funds away from law enforcement to other areas of community interest?
So I don't know that I would say that I'd be willing to go that far. I do agree that we need to be spending more money around preventing crime before it starts and investing in things like I've already said, behavioral and mental health care. I would like to see us continue to use the money that is being saved from our justice reform initiatives, that we are continuing to pour those dollars back into our prisons for rehabilitative services, for people while they're in prison, and then continuing when they're in transitional housing so that they are best prepared to re-enter our communities, right? And that is, most people who are incarcerated right now are coming home. They are coming home to us. And so it really behooves us to invest in those individuals so they can return and be productive members of our community. We owe that to them, and we owe it to ourselves.
I actually would propose we put more money into law enforcement, and one of the areas that we really need to emphasize is training, because it's been apparent in the last few years that some of the police officers don't understand how to relate with the community, and they make the problems worse rather than better. We need them to be sources of solutions, not sources of conflict. And so I think the training needs to extend to all different municipalities across the state, and that I would hope that the Louisiana State Police could coordinate that, but we need to have recertification of all our police officers in the state, because otherwise we'll continue to have problems.
Thank you. We have a follow-up question here that is related to some of your comments just now. How do you propose that we hold law enforcement accountable in a swift and transparent way?
Well, I think that they need to rewrite their procedures so that they understand what their limits are and what their goals are when they interact with the public. Too often, I think they are wild cards. They do what they want to do off the top of their head. They get overly excited in chases, and then when they finally get to the resolution of the chase, they're so wound up that they overreact. And I think so the training needs to work with procedures that teach them how to interact with the public, how to de-escalate problems, and how to make sure that they're safe in the process and the people they're interacting with are safe in the process, and make sure that the public around them when they have these events is protected as well.
So I do believe that we need better training when it comes to de-escalation. We need resources deployed at our police stations when people are having a mental health crisis, that the only people responding are not police officers, but we have social workers and psychologists that are responding. So I think that that would help us a great deal. The training should be around what we know are research-based proven methods to reducing violence between officers and the public, right? There is a body of research out there that we know works when it comes to de-escalation, and so we have to insist as a state that we're going to rely on the things that we know provide for a safer community for all of us, including our officers. Those studies are out there. We're just not implementing them in the state of Louisiana.
Thank you both so much. So we're going to move on to gun violence. So not a happy topic, of course, to discuss, but gun violence was on the decline nationally and locally before the pandemic. Now we've seen years of significant uptick in violent crime, and particularly here in Baton Rouge. What factors do you think uniquely shape the state of gun violence in our area, in our district, and in our city and our country?
So I think the thing that makes Louisiana unique is the high prevalence of guns in houses in our community, right? We have a very high rate of gun ownership. That in and of itself is not a bad thing. I'm a gun owner, right? The problem is that we have a very lackadaisical approach to gun storage in many of the homes in our community, which means that guns are available for children to play with and accidentally shoot themselves. Guns are available for kids to access in a fit of anger with consequences that they cannot take back, that guns are available when homes are burglarized to be stolen because they're not secured properly. And so I think that part of that is something that is easily addressed if we have responsible gun owners. I will say that I've been really pleased that permitless carry has not passed in the state of Louisiana, and you can know that I would not vote for a bill that would allow permitless carry. Responsible gun ownership means having a base of knowledge.
My perspective is a lot of the gun violence is fed by drugs. I think a lot of the drug dealers are feeding guns into our community and encouraging individuals to use them. I agree also that the guns in homes and cars aren't as secured as they should be, especially cars. We have kids going through the neighborhoods, going through cars, looking for guns more than anything else. If you leave your car unlocked and you've left a gun in your car, you've asked for a situation that caused problems down the road. I think education is necessary to build the self-esteem of young people so they don't turn to weapons in the first moment of a disagreement. They need to learn how to work with each other when they're coming up through the lower grades so that they don't escalate to trying to kill someone to settle an issue.
Thank you both. Ms. Davis, you had mentioned permitless carry, so this is one of our follow-up discussions and questions for you both. The legislature has had at least one representative propose permitless carry of a firearm without a background check or permit for almost 6 years now. Louisiana is the only state in the Deep South to resist this bill and has either voted against it or vetoed this bill each time it's come up. Polls show that more than 80% of Louisianians also oppose this bill. Ms. Davis, you have mentioned your stance on this, so feel free to expand. But the question is, would you support permitless carry? Why or why not? I'll start with you.
I would not support it. I think putting more guns on the streets is a bad idea. I think not knowing who's carrying the guns and what their background is a formula for disaster. I think we need to do more to stop the sale of automatic weapons. I can understand you want to have self-protection. I understand you want hunting, but we're not talking about hunting and self-protection. We're talking about multiple cartridge firing guns that are nothing but trouble. I'm very much against anything that expands the number of guns on our streets.
And I would just say, I attended a lot of the legislative committee hearings where this bill was debated. And do you know who really does not want permitless carry in the state of Louisiana? Law enforcement officers, right? Because they know that it makes their job much more dangerous as they're trying to protect our communities. And this is an instance where we ought to listen to them, right? Education around permitless carry is incredibly important. And I firmly believe that it's in our best interest in terms of community safety, that if individuals are going to have concealed carry, that they ought to have the education necessary to be able to do that, right? It makes me incredibly nervous to think about guns in my classroom at LSU. I don't like even seeing them when I'm grocery shopping, right? They're, and again, as I say that, like as a gun owner, right, and a responsible one. So I would not be in support of a permitless carry bill.
Thank you both so much. The beautiful state we live in, mostly because of our unique geography, also puts us in a vulnerable place when we think about changing climate. So we're going to talk a minute about this. Louisiana, like the rest of the world, has just experienced the hottest July and August on record. Sea levels are actively rising, and it is becoming harder to live in climate vulnerable communities like Southeast Louisiana, our home. Keeping in mind the governor's creation of the Climate Initiatives Task Force and federal environmental packages that have funding for solar energy, energy efficiency, and more, what would be the first step that the legislature could take that you would support in addressing the climate crisis from that role?
I think that there has to be a coordinated effort among the stakeholders that are on our working coast, right? We are not Florida where we have a bunch of beaches where people are hanging out. Louisiana has a working coast. That means that we have to keep people close to their jobs and the industries and the ports, right, that they're working in. And so it means that we're going to have business and industry and environmental groups all come together to figure out what we can do to make property insurance affordable for these individuals. We have to think about the actions that we can take to mitigate climate change, right? We not only are suffering the consequences of climate change, we are also a big producer of climate change. And so we have to keep our foot on the gas when it comes to funding to rebuild the protections of our coast and to reduce our own emissions.
I worked 23 years in the nuclear business. I supplied the primary seals for nuclear reactors and the core protection equipment. I'm hopeful that we can get to the point where we start bringing nuclear power back in. Reactor designs have changed significantly, and they would be very helpful in no emissions. I also think the carbon capture process has some significant gains in removing greenhouse gases, the carbon dioxide, and I think we should support that activity. As far as I'm concerned, when we look at the ITEP program, we should not be extending ITEP grants or relief of taxes on it unless the industry bringing in the potential plant has an ecologically a design to assist in our environment and not contribute to the problems. I know they bring in jobs, they bring in...
Oh, you want to wrap it up real quick? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go a little off script here since you brought up the industrial tax exemption program. I think that's something interesting. As we all know, Louisiana is really the only state that allows this tax exemption program to be something that public education is vulnerable to. Our local government agencies, our school boards, can actually vote on these and support them. The only similar structure is in Texas, but Texas, their state legislature reimburses the school districts for those exemptions if they vote on them. So when it comes to plans like ITEP, we are under an executive order currently, the way that this operates. Where do you see the legislature's role in making sure that this continues, that our local governments have control over that, and especially our public school systems?
I think that it's important that the legislature sets the criteria. They need to interact with the local taxing districts, the school boards, to make sure that they are appropriately represented in the discussions by the legislature. But I still think they need to go out and find industry to build opportunities for jobs, because we need investment in our city and in our state. We need investment for jobs, but we just have to be careful so that the investment is not counter to our environment, and only give ITEP to situations where we're getting a significant benefit directly to the community, including the number of jobs and the impact on environment.
I mean, I agree with all of the changes that Governor Edwards has made to ITEP and that they should all be made permanent. It subverts local democracy when you have citizens, right, who are willing to tax themselves, right? That's always hard to get them to agree to tax themselves, but they're saying, we want to pay these taxes for education. We want to pay them for our roads. We want to pay these taxes to our police and our firefighters, and to have a state body with the ability to come in and subvert the political will of local governments is just wrong. It's not democratic. And so allowing those local bodies to have a voice in approving those tax exemptions is critical to maintaining community services. And so I would make those changes permanent to the ITEP program, and think about ways to expanding them. I liked what you said about making environmental quality a part of how we're evaluating ITEP jobs.
Thank you both. Very thoughtful discussion there. So we talked about our wonderful geography and climate and where we are located. The other thing that makes Louisiana special is our diversity and the people of our state and our district. So we're going to talk a little bit about our community members and the LGBTQIA+ community. In 2023, we saw an influx of bills targeting this community, our LGBTQIA+ family members and individuals, specifically those in the trans community. Though vetoed by the governor, HB 648 passed, and in 2024 will limit gender-affirming care for transgender youth and not allow for exceptions for parents who had consented for their children to access this care. Do you believe that this was an overreach by the legislature and a blow to parental rights and an invasion of their medical relationship with their doctors and children?
I'm a little bit on the fence on this. I understand that the parents need to have the right to control their kids until the kids are adults. But it's such a permanent change that I'm not sure I support it. I think the bill is not overreaching. I am concerned more about, I think there's a whole series of laws or proposals to limit personal freedoms, and freedom of choice when it comes to your own gender is one of the personal freedoms that should not be challenged. I think we've come a long way in our country and in the state to accept people for who they are and not try to impose state regulations on people's lives.
So from my perspective, outside of public health emergencies and outside of laws and regulations that are passed around community safety and health standards, the government doesn't have any business in the doctor's office with parents and their children, right? I think that the parent is the one that knows the child best in that situation and is not taking these decisions lightly. They're done in consultation with doctors and with psychologists, and you know, this plethora of bills that has come out attacking this community. I mean, I'll just say, right, I was there in the legislature advocating against these bills because I think that it harms children, and especially when you have a child that is dealing with this particular issue, right? I have friends who are dealing with this, and their number one job right now, they'll tell you as a parent, is to keep their child alive, and what Louisiana is doing is not helping that.
Thank you so much. And I'm also related to healthcare. I'd like to bring up the topic of reproductive rights and reproductive health care. The topic of abortion is an important one, and many people in this state have indicated through polling that they support this to be a situation that's between a woman and her doctor. However, we've seen some legislation pass that says otherwise. What is your position on abortion? Is it to be regulated by lawmakers, or should people who are actually going through the birthing process have the right to decide their own health care? And I would also like for you to address the topic of exceptions in the case of rape and incest as far as abortion, the abortion bill goes.
I'm very much in favor of letting families and women chart their own future when it comes to medical issues. I think whether to have an abortion or not is a medical decision for the family to make. The woman, if there's a dispute, the woman gets priority on that discussion. I think that prohibiting people to leave the state to have an abortion is an overreach. I think it's unconstitutional. I think that it's just a matter of interference in personal rights by the government, and I fully object to it.
Medical care, including reproductive care, is a decision that ought to be made between a patient in consultation with their doctor, period. This is not something that government ought to be involved in regulating. And in particular around the issues of rape and incest, and our state having no exception for those incredibly difficult positions that, I mean, we are putting women's lives in danger, teenage girls in danger with these policies, and we're endangering families, right? When women cannot access the reproductive health care that they need, right, and their lives are in danger, that means we are putting their family at risk. Children growing up without a mother because our state has chosen to interfere between something that should have been a decision between a woman and her doctor is the wrong thing for our state to be doing.
Thank you both for your thoughtful answers. So we're going to engage those of you who joined us this evening, and you are invited to propose questions to both candidates, and they will have 1 minute to respond. And I will walk around, and who would like to ask the first question? Everybody's pretending to be shy. There we go. Okay.
I have candy in my mouth. Sorry, I can still talk through that. I appreciated both of your answers to the questions. I would like to know, if you were elected, what would we have as a safety net that you are going to do exactly what you say you're doing now? Because so often, you know, politicians run on a platform and they get in office and they do something totally different, disregard their platform altogether. What kind of checks and balances will you guys have to make sure that we know that you're doing your job?
Okay, you each have 1 minute. We'll start with you, Ms. Davis.
Well, I think it starts with communication with the people in our district around the decisions that we're making and making sure that we have our fingers on the pulse of the desires of the folks that are living in our district. Your ultimate control over us is our reelection, right? And so if I don't do what I'm telling you to do tonight in this room, then you should vote me out of office. Or if I'm really going off the rails, recall me. Right? I mean, that is you guys are the ones that ought to be holding us accountable for the decisions that we make in the Louisiana legislature. And I would welcome, of course, like interactions with you, emails, phone calls, so you can tell me when I'm not doing the right thing.
I think the biggest issue is that the makeup of the legislature at this point, and potentially the governorship, could prevent me from making a significant impact on some of these social issues. I will stand by them, but I don't say that I can pass some of the legislation that needs to be passed because there's not the body of the legislatures to support that. That would be my concern.
This last legislative session, I had the opportunity to sit in on a number of committee hearings. My takeaway from that was that the testimony had less effect on the representatives than the party that they belong to. In other words, if you might be persuaded by the testimony, but it's not what your contributors and your party stands on, then you're going to vote with your comrades. I mean, you know, with the people that put you there in power. I mean, that's the conundrum, I would think, for a politician. That what will happen if you vote opposite to what your party's policy is is that they will find someone else to run for your position. So I just would like both of you to comment on that and how you feel about that. Because I was just taken aback by how compelling some of this testimony was and how it was ignored.
Yeah, for me, two things. One is I'm 75 years old. I don't intend to run a second time. Okay. Also, I left the Republican Party to become a no-party candidate because I don't agree with a number of the policies of the Republican Party, and I also don't agree with a number of the policies of the Democratic Party. So I'm running as a no-party candidate. So I won't be influenced by party connections. I'll be an independent voice.
I mean, I think that what you said is absolutely true. I mean, I'm a political science professor, and so parties have lots of ways to punish their members for not towing the party line, right? That's just the fact. And so all I can tell you is that when you get me, you get a fighter and somebody that is not afraid to buck the system. I've been doing education advocacy in the state of Louisiana for well over a decade, and there are a lot of people that don't like me because I have taken positions that have been unpopular in order to protect marginalized groups in our community. And so I'll just tell you, all I can tell you is I'm going to do what I think is right and what I think is right for the people of 68 and not for the Democratic Party.
Thank you both.
Good evening. Recently, we've seen a mass uprising of workers in the film industry, most recently the UAW and the auto industry. Currently, Louisiana has a right-to-work statute on the books, seeing that inflation is eating away at people's paychecks. Will any of you commit to repealing right-to-work laws and empowering unions, which in turn help empower the hardworking people of Louisiana?
I mean, I would just say that I would love for the right to work law to be repealed, but there's also the political reality, right, that that is probably not going to happen. And so I think that the best thing that we can do now is work to empower unions and to keep the power that they do have, to fight legislation that tries to remove their ability to deduct their union dues from their paychecks, right? Like that is only about crushing the power of unions and their ability to advocate for others. And so I think that we need to do things to strengthen unions in our state so that they can be better advocates for us when it comes to living wages for all of our workers. We should be raising the minimum wage in our state. But we have to be mindful, right, that unions are under attack, and despite the fact that we don't have a huge union population, our big business likes to blame them, right, for all the things that are going wrong in our state, which is ridiculous.
I'm not pro-union. I'm pro-free enterprise. I think that the only minimum wage that we really need to impose is on governmental salaries. I would like free enterprise to determine the pay scale for outside of government work. I think one of the concerns is daycare centers are underpaid. I would have no problem with raising the minimum wage for government-funded positions, but I don't think it helps in the industry. And I won't take an active role in trying to make unions stronger.
Thank you both. More questions? I know that they're in there. Great.
I apologize if it's been asked already, but given this state has a lot of backlog in infrastructure, there's a lot that needs to be done. I'm curious what the candidates see as the top priority.
I think the top priority is getting the highways fixed. I'm hopeful that the I-10 widening and the new bridge are in our future and that they go well. It's scary to think that we're finally getting around to working on the I-10 system, given the volume of our our travel at this point. It's going to be a major headache, but it's something we have to see through. Otherwise, it's just going to become more and more of a problem.
I think that in order to protect our investments that are ongoing right now in our infrastructure, in particular roads and bridges, we have to stop members of our legislature from decreasing state revenue, right? Because that is going to be a big push. We have to think about ways to keep the budget surpluses that we have now so that we can address the enormous backlogs that we have when it comes to infrastructure. And I'll just our roads are bad when I've got teenage boys, and every time we travel out of the state of Louisiana, they always ask, why are the roads so good here, right? So with teenage boys who are usually clueless to this kind of stuff, even they realize how bad our roads are. We have a real problem. And so we can't afford to be doing things like cutting state revenue by decreasing taxes when we have this enormous amount of infrastructure backlogs that have to be addressed.
Okay, thank you all for your questions, and we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to do an abbreviated closing remarks. We got so much information from you. We'll take 1 minute per candidate for closing remarks, and then we'll move on. So you went first, Ms. Davis. So if for opening, did we not?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So please give us your closing remarks.
The one thing that I would like to emphasize is that we have to build a better community. It has to be a wider community. It has to be more economically viable for the residents all across the state, especially in the lesser developed areas. And the other thing I want to say is that I'm very serious about volunteer work. I put in 21 years as a volunteer, and I would hope that everyone will take an opportunity in their lives to help other people out by volunteering. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I will say that I think that the future of Louisiana depends on us turning our focus to the quality of life problems that Louisiana families are having. That when we focus on making our families healthy physically, healthy economically, living in a healthy environment, then the other things in our state will start to improve. And so when we focus on the needs of families and addressing the gaps that exist, we end up with a better Louisiana and a better future for our children. I want my 3 sons to stay and to raise their families in this great state. And in order to do that, we have got to figure out how to improve the quality of life for all of our families. And so I would appreciate your vote on October 14th if you live in District 68.
Thank you all so much. And thank you to the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice and all the partners that made tonight possible, for all of y'all here in the room and for everyone that will be watching eventually. Most importantly, make sure you're registered to vote, be ready, have a plan, and go out there and vote. Thank you all so, so much.